This is Jill Breit speaking. Today is Friday, September 19th, 2008. And I'm here in Essex, New York, speaking with Ron Jackson, who is the supervisor here, the town supervisor. And we're sitting in the town hall in Essex and looking out across the street, actually towards the house that Ron grew up in, which I think is pretty terrific. So, Ron, could you just start by telling me a little bit about your family background here in the Adirondacks?
Well, my family on my mother's side has been here since after the War of 1812. My several great-grandfather was over here for the Battle of Plattsburgh and liked the area and bought several pieces in Essex. And two of his sons came over here and lived. One stayed, the other did not, went on several years later out to the Chicago area. And that's on my mother's side. They've been here ever since. My father met my mother during World War II, and they moved up here after the war when he got back from overseas, and been here ever since. I was born here, raised here, born in Town Hospital, but after 3 days, I've been here basically ever since.
Right.
Yeah.
When you were growing up, what kind of livelihood was your family making here?
Well, my father was a plumber and electrician. Later on, when I was getting out of high school, they built a store that's now the fitness center up here. It had a little store where he worked out of, and they sold appliances and stuff like that. My mother, for many years, worked at the bank, but my mother's family was all farm family. My grandfather and his father, and et cetera, way back till they've been here. We're all dirt farmers.
What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a term they use for them. They worked in the dirt.
They worked in the dirt,
Yeah.
Raising crops as opposed to pasturing cattle.
Right. Well, they had that too.
Oh, okay.
The old days, there was no specialized farms. You did everything. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you raised everything you ate and made wool from what spun the wool, and you was pretty much self-sufficient.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm interviewing you is that I'm working with the Adirondack History Center on a maple project that they're doing some research and documentation. And in fact, you spoke at the Maple Festival in April at the Adirondack Center there. So let's talk a little bit about maple syrup. What place did that have in your family's tradition?
I know my great-grandfather did not make syrup. He used to rent out the woods, but I assume his father did, but I don't know for sure. But he never, Frank Cross never made syrup to my knowledge. But Uncle Herrick, my great-uncle, started in, I guess it was right after the Depression, or during the Depression. He started making syrup and had... Cheney Stafford built his first sugar house, which later became the woodshed for the new sugar house. That I remember both. I can just remember the old sugar house, going in there when I was very small. And when Uncle Herrick and Aunt Vera had their one child, Herrick Jr., that's the year that they built, I think it was 53 or 54, they built the new sugar house. And that's one, of course, I remember the best. And then the old sugar house became the woodshed for the new sugar house. And Uncle Herrick and my grandfather, Warren Cross, built the new sugar house. And my grandfather always, he was retired from when I can remember. He'd gotten off the farm. Uncle Marshall took over the farm, so he was retired and did carpentry work and stuff. And he always helped Uncle Herrick with making the syrup. So that sugar house was built in 53, and Uncle Herrick made syrup for about 50 years before he finally gave it up. Towards the end, when Herrick Jr. grew up a bit, he helped and then eventually took over the operation. And they had several bad years in a row and did not make syrup. They quit making it for several years, and then one time I was home from going to sea at the right time, so I went up and borrowed some buckets and cooked it down with propane on my patio just so I could make some syrup. And
were you living in town at the time?
Yeah. And then Harry come down and when I was boiling stuff. He said, he says we ought to get the sugar bush going, try it again. So then I started helping him, and we made syrup for several years until he sold the land to Sandy Lewis Family Farms, and then I continued. I ran it for Sandy Lewis for a couple of years till we had a parting of the ways, and now unfortunately nobody is making syrup there.
And you don't have a sugar bush yourself, right?
No, I don't.
You live in town?
Well, no, I live a mile out of town.
Okay.
You drove by it on the way coming in, but
Okay.
I have some maples on the property, and next door there's a lot. Somebody else, Pustle Pine, taps them. Some of them. He doesn't tap all of them and make syrup. But really, supervisor, I really don't have the time.
Yeah.
It's such a huge time commitment to make syrup that I just can't really do that. When I retire, I may get a small evaporator and make syrup again, but it's just not practical now.
Yeah. And where is the Lewis farm? Where is that property that was?
That's on Whalens Bay Road,
Okay.
right, and intersects with the middle road. That's where the family farm was. It was in the family from after the War of 1812 to Harry sold it to Lewis Family Farms. This century. It was I think around 2003. I think he sold it.
That must have been
for.
a huge thing in the family then, if it had been in the.
Well, it was an inevitability. It was just a question of when. It wasn't a question of if at that time.
Mm-hmm. Because there weren't any kids who wanted.
Well,
to buy it.
not really. Harry
Yeah.
had one son, and Harry really never farmed it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't own a farm if you're not going to farm it and make money from it to pay the taxes and everything. It just to own it, you have to have a heck of a job to be able to support that. So it was inevitable that it was going to be sold.
Yeah. Now, all those years that your family was making sugar, was it considered kind of a seasonal source of income?
Absolutely, and it actually stretched out because, particularly after Uncle Herrick retired, him and Aunt Vera used to then take the syrup and then break it down into smaller containers and make maple cream and maple sugar and cookies and brownies and different stuff with it, and they'd go to yard sales and stuff like that and peddle the syrup that way and make a little bit more than bulking it out or just selling it in gallons. Originally, all Uncle Herrick did is sell it by gallons. If you didn't need a gallon of syrup, you didn't need syrup. And that was back when you used to get good metal cans and stuff. And he would boil until he got done to dark and then bring it up in milk cans and put it in the granary. And then he'd get up in the morning and put it in the metal cans then, stone cold, of course, by then. But there was never any problem. Once in a while you'd get a little bit of stuff and you just have to strain it and heat it and put it back in the can. But it was never a big deal. The tin you have today is not as good, and of course the plastic is very particular. You have to have your syrup 180 degrees or it just won't keep, and glass is even more particular than plastic. If you go with the beautiful glass bottles, that you've got to preheat the bottles in the oven and get your syrup basically just about to boil, and then if you're real lucky they go up good. But glass is, you would think being a nerd would be the easiest thing to put it in, but it's far and away the most difficult to put syrup in.
That's interesting. I did not know that. So those heavy metal cans were the ones that, for whatever reason, were least likely to lead to the syrup turning.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Which is actually a fermenting what happened. You converting your sugar from one type to another. It's what forms is kind of like mother and vinegar. Mm-hmm. It's the same type of thing.
Interesting.
Yep.
So he was selling in the gallon, so he didn't get into the bulk market.
He very rarely did. If he had a real good year and couldn't get rid of it, then he'd, with Earl Parker up in West Shazy, he'd bring up any extra there, and if he was lucky, he could sell a drum or part of a drum with somebody else, or and sell some bulk, but very little.
Now, when he was making sugar, how common was it for people around here in general to be doing that as a seasonal
I'm
business?
going to say when I was growing up, there was somewhere between 2 and 3 dozen sugar houses that were actively making syrup in Essex.
Mm-hmm. In Essex?
Yeah, just in the town. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now I think, Puss made it last year, and I think Shelby did, but I'm not certain. I think they were the only two.
And do you think it is a factor of it being just so labor intensive for what you get?
Labor intense, and you see, it used to be that when everybody farmed, that was the least busy time in a farmer's yearly cycle, so you could fit it in. There's not many people farming anymore. When I was growing up, there was probably 3 dozen farms with cows, milk cows. Now we have one person that milks in the town of Essex. And person that lives in Essex, George Sayward, keeps cows here, but his actual milking barn is in Willsboro. So there's only one barn where they milk in the whole town of Essex now. So.
Which is pretty amazing to me, because as I was driving through this morning, this area, I looked out at these fields and I thought, oh my gosh, the Champlain Valley here is just such a beautiful, farming area. It looks like a farm area.
And it is, but they're not dairy cows.
Uh-huh.
There's not many dairy cows. There's a lot of people that grow hay for horses. The horse market is big. The square bales. That's one of the biggest. There's a lot of movement, and a lot of people are growing organic soybeans and wheat and corn and stuff. And there's a premium on that. A little more labor intensive in some ways than the traditional, but the premium on it makes up for the labor, at least at this point in time.
And when did that transition from the dairy farming to the other crops really take place?
Over my lifetime, basically.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been a gradual thing, and bulk tanks when they came in, used to be the farmers took their milk either to Mather's Dairy, or if you were farther out in the western part of the town, southwestern, you might have taken it over to Anson's Dairy in Wadhams in milk cans. And then in the 60s, they came in with the bulk tanks, and that eliminated a lot of the small farmers because it was such a huge investment. That's when my uncle got out, and my grandfather's farm got sold because you just couldn't justify a small herd anymore. You couldn't. Too much money, too little return, and that knocked a lot of out. And then just over a period of time, over the next 20 years after that, it just farmers got bigger or got out, and then from the 70s on, the milk prices stayed the same basically, and all the cost went up, and that drove a tremendous amount. If you didn't have a diversified farm, you didn't make it. If somebody had gotten and just concentrated on the dairy aspect, they got ran out of business. You had to have multiple things. Like George Sayward has the corn, he raises heifers, he sells hay, all these other things in addition to the dairy, so that one's bad, the other can pick it up a bit. But if George would have gone like a lot of people did, just strictly on dairy cows, all those people either re-diversified or had to get out.
Get out of it.
It was basically from the 60s to the next 20 years, farms either consolidated, and even then a lot of those consolidated farms, they just got out of the dairy business. They're doing a little better now. The price of milk is up some, but it'll never be what it was. It'll never be the backbone of Essex County the way it was when I was growing up.
And when did the horses come into the picture? You said that's a factor. Are people raising horses around here now?
There are more horses, but a lot of the hay goes out of the area, down to Saratoga, down to Albany, down to New Jersey, other places.
And Saratoga, of course, has the racetrack.
Yeah, and a lot of other horses, too. There's a lot of people down there that raise horses. They have 20 acres. They work in the city. They have horses because they like horses.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's an expensive hobby.
Now, do you have any sense of how many second homeowners in this area might come up and make sugar in the spring just on a lark because it's fun? You don't know of any?
No.
And do you know of any year-round residents who are not farmers primarily, but who do it just for their own family or? The
two that are making it that I know of in Essex now, one grew up on a family farm, and then they got rid of the cows, and they're back. They leased their land. Now they're back haying and stuff. So he's kind of his. But the other one, Puss Lapine, has never been a farmer, but he's retired and he likes making syrup, so he makes it every year.
And what is his name?
Harry Lapine Jr. Everyone calls him Puss. Yeah.
Okay, nicknames.
For my time, I don't know how he got it.
And who was the other fellow you were referring to?
Shelby Gardner. He's
Okay.
a younger fellow. He's the age of my boys, actually. Harry younger. He just got married here 2 weeks ago now.
Uh-huh.
And he was, I think they're still living with his father and his stepmother in Essex.
Uh-huh.
He makes syrup, not every year, but most years he does.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, he likes making syrup.
I happen to live surrounded by sugar bushes that I don't own and I don't work. So that I wondered about that because one of my neighbors does make it. He's a teacher, but he makes it as just kind of a, something for his family.
It's fun.
Yes.
It's a lot of work, but it's fun, and you make no money. If you break even, you had a pretty good year. If you really get into it and you have your markets established, you can make a little money with it, but you're never going to get much per hour if you figure it on a time basis.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned earlier that there were a few years that your relatives didn't sugar. Was that weather related?
No.
It was
Harry
just things in
Jr.
the
was
family.
busy, and they just had
Okay.
2 just absolute horrible years, because a lot of the work is the same whether you have a good year or a bad year. The tapping, the cleanup, the washing the buckets, and they had just 2 or 3 really bad years where they made hardly any syrup. And it's weathers and cycles and luck and everything else involved with that. So they just decided that it wasn't worth it anymore, and they just quit making it for, I think it was about 4 years. They didn't make it.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, you're right across the lake from the big syrup rivals, Vermont. What was the general attitude or the feeling about what made your syrup different, if anything? Was there any feeling of a competition? Or?
Not really that way. I don't think. In fact, when Vermont syrup got famous, was it 38, the World's Fair in New York? And Vermont had a horrible syrup year that year, and the vast majority of Vermont maple syrup that was at the World's Fair came from Shazy and West Shazy, New York. But
so there's always been this feeding of syrup over to Vermont,
always
right?
a little bit of back and forth.
Uh-huh.
To me, the biggest difference in quality of syrup, if you're a real small producer, it's hard to have your quality control up as well as what you would like. And I feel that the middle-sized producer makes the best syrup. If you use an RO machine, which most people do these days, because fuel cost, whether it's wood you're chopping or oil you're buying or propane or whatever, are so huge. By using a reverse osmosis machine, you can cut your boiling in half or more. I know that one time, just because they wanted to try it, they ran it through several times, the RO machine, and they got it down to the right density for syrup. And it was sweet, but it had absolutely no flavor. So the boiling is what not only gets rid of the water, but brings the maple flavor out. So my theory is anything that reduces the boiling reduces the flavor. So yes, you get lighter syrup because it's not in the pan as long, but I just don't think it has the flavor that if you take it and boil it all the way down, if you run it through the hour. It's still good syrup, but just not quite as good in my opinion.
Yeah, interesting. Now, what do you think about, making candy and cream and all of that?
I've done all of that. It's very labor intensive, and it helps you market syrup, and I used to do it more for Christmas gifts and stuff like that than I did for selling. I never got too big into selling. I'd sell some. Herrick used to, when I made it with him, do some marketing, so would make some cream and sugar that he could sell along with the syrup. But other than that, I never was interested in the marketing aspect of it. I like making it. I didn't like marketing it, so I was never big onto that part of it.
Uh-huh.
But I'd make the stuff for my kids and family and friends and for Christmas gifts and stuff like that.
And do you use a more modern tubing system, or do you use the can or the buckets?
Well, actually, a little bit of both. For when Herrick and I were doing it before he sold the place, another former sugar bush in town that a friend owned on a side hill, we put in a tubing system. And that spreads out the work. It does not save you any work compared to buckets. It really doesn't. When you figure up all your time, because you got to repair your tubing, you got to wash it after, and then you got to haul it, unless you have it all on your property. When all is said and done, it really doesn't save you any time, but it does spread it over a longer period, so the same number of people can make more syrup if you have that. Harris Sugar Bush was always buckets. We never had any tubing, and right up until the end when I finished, it was still all buckets. But we did have some tubing on another place, and it worked well, and they'd keep improving tubing, and it would work even better. But you got to fight the squirrels, you got to go back and make repairs, you got to walk it. Even during the season, you got to walk it because the squirrels will come down and chew on the tubing, and all of a sudden you're not getting quite as much sap as you expected to get. You walk up and there's, you know, a main subline that they've chewed through, you got to repair and all that. So it has a downside too, but it does spread the work out over a longer period, so the same number of people can make more syrup with that type of system. And then the biggest plus, which we didn't use, we just used the natural vacuum. If you have a vacuum pump on, you make a lot more sap. On days that it won't drip into a bucket, that vacuum will encourage it, and you'll make you'll get a lot more sap, and you can go at least another 2 weeks often into the season, at the end of the season, because of if you have the tubing in a vacuum pump.
Now let's talk about the start of the season, because there is some folklore around signs, how you know the sugar's about to start running. Do you have any of those things you look for, birds you listen for, flowers you look for?
No, the biggest one we used to have is the end of the season, when you heard the frogs peeping in the mud pond up above the sugar bush. You know you had 1 week to go.
Oh, all right.
So that was pretty good. Then you're just watching your temperatures more than anything, and because that's everything else is important, but temperature is absolutely the most critical. A lot of people, like up in Chazy, where they have huge sugar bushes, they have to actually do a lot of their tapping before the syrup flows. They have no choice. I would never do that. I would wait until it was, because I was always afraid of, and it is a problem for people that you can. The wood's totally frozen when you tap it, then you could have splits run out on you and stuff. But so I just wait until you start getting up above freezing weather, and they predicted more of that to come. Then start tapping and cleaning up the sugar house and getting ready to go.
Now, to give me an idea of how many trees you need to do this, let me try to give an example from my own life. I have a hedgerow behind my house. Nice old maples, they're probably 70-year-old maples, something like that. I have, let's say, a dozen of those trees. Oops, here I am knocking over my equipment. If I were to tap those, what would I reasonably expect to get?
Well, they say you get a pint a tap.
Okay.
I think that's true with the vacuum system. You probably make more than that. Without one, I think it probably on a year to year, there's years you do that, but overall you probably don't quite average that. We used to hang 900 and something buckets, and we would make anywhere between 200 and 300 on the average. We made more, and they got out because they had several years in a row when they made 58 and 73 gallons, and just wasn't worth their effort. But on the average, let's say you'd make that pint of syrup for each tap, and it depends on the size of the tree how many taps you can put in it.
Okay. Now let's talk about the social aspect of sugaring. Do you remember when you were growing up there being sugaring parties or neighbors working together doing it?
Always. It's kind of a spring rite. You've been locked up in your house other than ice fishing or hunting rabbits. There's not much you can do outside of that and chop wood during the winter. So now when the weather would change, you can actually get out. It was too early to work in the fields or your garden, but you wanted to do something. And people always, when Uncle Harry had it, when we ran it, there's always people would come up to help for a day here, a day there, help gather. And the boiling and of course the sampling of the syrup. They had to help with that, but it's always a tradition. People like to get out and help.
Yeah. And would you cook other things in the boiling sat? Would you boil eggs and?
I have done that, but not often. By the time I got involved with, and they had all plastic, you had to be more careful with your temperatures. So I made a pot. I had a friend make for me with 2 spouts in it, one for a spout and one for a thermometer, so you could use it on a propane heater and heat it up over the 180 you had to have for canning in plastic. And then you go ahead and, so you take it after you filtered it, you've got to reheat it in order to put it in plastic. You never had to do with that with metal, but with plastic, you couldn't get it out of there fast enough, hot enough to really be confident that you were going to get syrup that wouldn't swell on you. So I'd use that. I'd cook on that. I'd sometimes use I'd make a stew a lot, and I'd use sap for making the stew, so it'd have a little maple taste and be a little bit sweeter. Not a lot, but just a little bit. You could notice it though.
Nice. That sounds
good.
And
do stuff like that, but occasionally throw eggs in, but it's too much of a mess potential. I really didn't do that much. You couldn't be boiling hard and put that in there. You're going to break your eggs. So.
Yeah. What about sugar on snow? Did you ever do that?
Not in the sugar house. Simple reason, you've got to cook it down more, and until we got the propane in there for that, we didn't have any way really of doing that. That was always after we got done. You could do it somewhere else on a day when you weren't making syrup. You could have sugar on snow parties, but not in the sugar house itself. I don't ever remember.
And would there actually be parties in
Oh yeah,
the woods,
people, not big parties, but you'd get a bunch of your relatives around and cook some down, put it on snow. Yeah.
And did the maple syrup you made end up in the family cooking in general year round?
Oh yeah.
Like what kinds of recipes do you?
Well, the number one I use it for is my baked beans, which I make a lot of for a lot of different places and occasions, church suppers or anything, picnics and stuff like that. I always use the recipe that calls for maple syrup in that. Aunt Vera used to be a lot more prolific at that than I was. I've got the recipes, all that, and I did make some. I make less now that I'm a diabetic and my kids are grown and stuff than I did years ago. But I used to use a lot more and use it in frostings and flavor and stuff.
Yeah, I've had some maple cakes. Those are good with maple frosting on it. Mm.
Yeah, and what I really liked was a maple cream pie. That was wonderful.
Ooh, I've never had that.
Oh, that's a great recipe. That's the Vermont cookbook. You still make it. It's still available, I'm sure, but they used to sell it at the fair over there. I'm sure they're still doing at Essex Junction, or you could get it up at Leaders. The cookbooks, they sold them up there too.
Oh, I'm going to look for that recipe.
That's
that
a great
sounds
one.
Good.
And there was one that was an extension on. You'd put that over a pound cake with had maple in it too. That was really good. I haven't done any of that for a while. I should for my grandkids' sake, but I have not made any of that. I bet you 10 years since I've made any of that. Well, 5 years anyway.
Do you still have all the family equipment from the sugaring?
No. That all went with the farm. All that was sold with it.
Okay. Shirley. Tell me again what your relationship.
She's my aunt.
She's your aunt.
She's my mother's youngest sister.
And she was talking about sugaring also at the event in April. And so you would have sugared with her sometimes, right?
Not much, really. Later on, some she'd come down, but by the time I was doing much other than getting in the way, she was married and gone, and they went overseas. Her and Jim were over in the Truck Territories, Truck Island, Kwajalein, Majuro, and those places for many years, and then they lived different places. So there wasn't much when we were both there at the same time. She kind of predates my involvement with it.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to talk to her at some point.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you're an adventuring family, because you were telling me earlier that you spent a lot of years at sea working for Texaco.
Right. Yeah.
And so you have this adventuring gene in the family.
Must be. Yeah. No, went all over the world, around it a couple times, and if you go one way, you have to go a second time, go the other way to get back unwound, you know.
That's right. Well, let's just talk just for a few minutes. I know you're in the middle of drawing up budgets, which is important. In terms of sort of the reputation of the Adirondacks as a maple syrup place, it's a specialty. Is that still a fair thing, or do you think that that's no longer a fair thing for us to
Well, I think
market
it's a
about
fair
ourselves?
thing, but it's certainly not anywhere near what it was. As I say, the backbone years ago was the dairy farmer who had time in the spring to make it, and there's just so many former maple groves that have been cut off or just aren't tapped. Some of it's state land now that used to. Rupert Lawrence's is down here at Split Rock Mountain. His is all state land. His was, and it's beautiful bush. I've been up through there hunting many times, and that would be an easy place to put in tubing. And he never had as many taps. He could have, I think, but he never put in as many as Uncle Herrick did. I think he was like about 400 or 500 taps. I think that's all he ever put into the most. He was a little bit smaller operation, but beautiful spot. It was hard then because of the slope, but the slope now is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But no, it's just there's fewer those that do it commercially to really make money at it, as opposed to those who do it because they love it. Much bigger operations. They're all tubing, and because of labor cost, you can't hire that many people. And the expense of it, they're all tubing and vacuum systems and all that.
That is interesting that formerly difficult sugaring sites where you have to haul buckets up and down now have an advantage because it runs right down through the tubes.
Right.
That it has changed what is a desirable site.
Yeah.
Now, why is Shazy still a big producer?
The land is what you have to remember is what makes good. If it's good farming land, there won't be trees on it. Mm-hmm. So areas up in that area that for one reason or another was not good enough soil or too steep or too rocky or whatever, they had trees, and for some reason the maples came in very well there as opposed to other places where it might be beach or something else. And they've just kept it up, and there's not as many people, but they're much bigger, as I'm sure, than like down here. The Earl Parkers and the Sagers and all those people took over sugar bushes that other people had abandoned, put in the vacuum system, and made it into a profitable enterprise. And down here, it just didn't happen for whatever reason. Perhaps there's less, being farther from Albany, New York City, there's less second home pressure up there. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't know why they've been able to keep them, but
yeah, that's interesting.
it's a good thing to have, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's neat. We have it over in Lewis County a lot too. There's lots of sugar production still going on in Lewis County. A lot of family operations.
Not as much in Essex. Definitely not as much as years ago.
Yeah. All right. Before I turn off the tape, is there anything else you can think of that you think would be good for me to get on the record about sugar production in this area, or your own experience? Maybe a favorite story you have?
Yeah, a couple stories. One of my favorite I used to always pick on my uncle about in the old sugar house. They had dirt floor. They didn't have a cement floor. And they had a board there beside it, and him and my grandfather were always rushing to see who'd get on the board, and Uncle would always tell that story, and then I'd always come back with, well, why didn't you put a second board down? But I guess it would have taken the fun of fighting over it about it. And then the other thing I remember is as a kid going up there, of course, Uncle would always let us take some samples, but we always thought that he didn't want us to drink too much. And we'd always, wait till he's busy putting wood in or something and take the scoop and get more syrup out of it. And then, of course, later on when I was making the syrup, I realized that there's nothing more he enjoyed than watching us drink the syrup and the smiles on our faces. And we weren't stealing the syrup is exactly what he wanted us to do. So that was, when you're in the other side of it, you get a different perspective, and that was when I made syrup, one of the things I enjoyed the most when kids came and the sparkle in their eyes and the smiles when they would taste the syrup. It was more valuable than the syrup you made by far.
Yeah. Something homey and wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's neat.
Yeah.
And he was letting you think you were getting away with something.
Exactly. When he was very happy, I'm quite sure he was very happy that we were doing it and enjoying it at the time.
Yeah. Did you ever make yourself sick eating too much sugar?
No. Probably led to my diabetes, though. Probably helped with that regard.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's on the rise for all kinds of reasons, right?
Yeah, it sure is.
Yeah. Well, nice. Well, thank you very much for taking
Well,
time
you're
out
welcome.
right now to talk to me about this.
I'm glad I could.